Today I'm going to be building a relatively small, low power and compact NAS that's relatively inexpensive. I'm going to be using mostly parts that I found around, but a few eBay parts I got here. I'm going to be building it around this motherboard. So this is a Gigabyte AM1 motherboard, and I got it with the CPU and the RAM on eBay for about 25 bucks shipped. It has the lowest end CPU you can get for AM1, so it's that Sempron dual core at 1.45 GHz based off the Kabini platform. It's quite slow for most tasks, but a basic NAS really doesn't need that much. And since it's low power, it's going to be a great use here. And those 4 gigs RAM are more than plenty for a basic NAS OS. The unfortunate parts of this platform is it's limited in I/O, so there's only 2 SATA ports on board, and I'm going to be using both of them with 2 different hard drives. It also doesn't really have many PCIe slots, 2 1Xs and 1 4X, so I could add more SATA ports that way later on. Some of the other parts I'm going to be using for this build include an older power supply I had laying around. I fully agree that a high quality power supply should be included in every build, but when you're on a tight budget like this one is here, using kind of an older one is fine. This one was an Antec one that's rated with 80 plus bronze, so it should be fine. For hard drives, I'm just using 2 Seagate drives I had laying around. I had a 250 gigabyte one and a 500 gigabyte one. I found these drives are able to get used very cheaply or almost free in some older systems, or if not, you can get them quite cheap on eBay. And they're not the most reliable things out there, but they're reasonably good. The last part of the build I'm going to be looking at is the case. So this is from an old HP pre-built. Just pulled it off of the bin of these systems. A lot of these seem to have just gotten almost free because the boards die or they're just too slow. They're sometimes a bit proprietary. This one has a few oddities, like HP just loved using Torx screws in this system for some weird reason. And this one's kind of nasty and has kind of some like grimy gut stuff on it. I don't know what exactly that's from, probably just the environment it was in. And they're kind of limited in terms of hard drives. It might be a pain to get 2 drives in here, but we'll see how that goes. Luckily, it's pretty much standard MATX, so the board that I have, which is kind of like slightly taller DTX, should just fit right fine in here. And here's what it looks like now with the motherboard in it. It is kind of a tiny motherboard compared to a full-size MATX. That's nice because it gives me a little bit extra room to work around in here. And it luckily lines with all the screw holes, so it fits nice and snugly and just lines up well. One of the annoyances I found was the front panel connectors. It seems like a lot of OEM systems kind of had this block that they like to use, which luckily this board just works with, but can be kind of annoying if your board doesn't. There's also some connectors I just chose not to use, like there's one for a front SD card reader USB, and there's another for a Wi-Fi card, which this board unfortunately won't be able to use. For being a proprietary case, I'm surprised I got front USB, all the front lights and power buttons, and everything to just work out of the box. I thought it would be much more of a pain working with these types of cases, but luckily that wasn't the case here. And now I got the power supply in there. It was kind of a tight fit, and a lot of the cables just didn't have a spot to go in here. Unfortunately, the cable management in this case is quite poor, so I kind of had to squish some cables in, and some of the runs were just really ugly. And it just looks kind of like a wire's nest in here with lots of weird colors, but fortunately the power supply did kind of fit. The next part of the build is mounting hard drives. So luckily, one of the drives just mounted in the spot where it was designed to go. It was a little 3.5-inch hard drive mount, 4 screws, and it's in. Then I found out there's no other spot. I've worked with a reasonable amount of these like OEM pre-built system cases before, and they all seem to have a second spot to put a 3.5-inch hard drive, except this one. Normally you can use like a 3.5-inch floppy bay if some of the older ones have it, but this one didn't have that, and it didn't have a second hard drive option. So kind of, I was looking at everything. I could have like tried to screw holes in the bottom or the top to put it through there, but the best option I had left was to just take out the DVD drive and let it sit. If I was doing this better or wanted to spend a little bit extra, I probably would have gotten like a little 5.25-inch bay to 3.5-inch bay adapter to pound it in permanently. Or if I wanted a kind of a slightly more effort solution, just use like double-sided tape and put it on the bottom. Or even attach it to the other hard drive, though that might not have been great for vibrations. And now comes the choice of operating system. I could have either gone with like a general use OS like Windows or Linux and use software to set up the RAID array like I'd like and use all the built-in management tools. That's a perfectly good option, but it does require a reasonable amount of knowledge on how servers work and storage and stuff like that. So there's quite a few NAS OSs that try to make all those settings easy to use. Some of these include like TrueNAS and unRAID and Open Media Vault. I decided I wanted to give unRAID a shot. And some of the reasons why I think unRAID would make a reasonable amount of sense here is that it's easy to add drives to. So if I wanted to get an HBA card or a SATA card in the future, I could easily add a couple drives and just get more space. Due to how unRAID stores data at a file level instead of a block level like most other RAID arrays, if you lose a drive, you only lose the data on that drive. So in this case, since these drives aren't the most trustworthy, I'd say, I could afford to lose one of them and I'd still have half the data, which I can't say with using most other traditional RAID solutions. Also, unRAID's kind of a bit more geared down for lower performance systems, whereas TrueNAS is a lot more, we want 8 gigs RAM, which just doesn't have. And it's a little bit more picky about hardware too, because I know a lot of like FreeBSD ones don't have drivers for the low-end network cards some of these boards have. Setting up unRAID on this system was quite simple. All I had to do was download the little tool and put it on a USB drive and put it in, and then select that as the bootable drive. And it just booted right up. And then on the screen it shows you my IP address that it pulled from the DHCP server. So I can just open that in a web page now. And all I've done up until this point is start the trial, so it looks like I have 14 days remaining on that trial. The one disadvantage of unRAID is it is a paid OS. Some people get really kind of upset that it's paid OS and it's free options, and I think they bring a pretty good value package. Disk setup wise, a disk can kind of either be set up as a parity drive or just a normal disk. It can also be set up as a cache, but you should only do that with SSDs. So with these two drives, I can either make it so one of my drives is my parity and one is my normal disk, which will give me a pretty limited amount of data, unfortunately. Or I can just make both of them data disks, which I'm tempted to do. I will have no redundancy, but assuming I back it up, and it's not super important data, it'll probably be fine. I'm probably only going to store like backups a second copy, so this won't be a huge issue. I'm going to just hit start here. It's going to start that disk array. There we go. And it says that it can't mount the disks, and it's going to say, yeah, that's not mountable. Let's take a look at a few other things. So the dashboard page kind of just goes over some things, like it has the system shares. It does say it's unprotected, like the user share. I wish unRAID by default would force you to change the root password instead of setting it to nothing and let you log in with nothing. Processor load is quite low because it's doing nothing. Memory use at idle looks like it's about a gig. So that's perfectly fine. It's doing about nothing. We can see it's... And now I'm going to set up an array. I'm just going to call it array. It's simple. All these default settings will just slowly fill up all your drives. So I did a Crystal disk mark run, and here are the results. Yeah, about what I'd expect out of the single drive, so not too bad. I'm now copying files to it just using Windows Explorer. There are a lot of just big files, getting about 85 megabytes per second, so about what Crystal Disk Mark says. And I took a peek at CPU usage, and ooh, it's a bit high. We might be able to get a little bit more out of it if we had a low CPU usage. I fired up SSH and looked at HTOP to see what was using it, and it seems to be mostly SMBD, which is the remote file sharing daemon, and the other one is SHFS, which is a SSH over remote systems mount. Looks like unRAID uses it as part of their array, and it's basically maxing out both cores of the CPU doing that. So yeah, that CPU, it does it, but it doesn't have too much left. But I think this does show that if you're running a gigabit NAS and you're not doing too much crazy stuff, you really don't need much more than really a bottom-of-the-line system from 2014. Now, some more steps which should be done on here is to set up like users and permissions to do that all correctly, maybe multiple shares from multiple people or uses, add some more disks, adding a parity drive would be great. If you could get some more hardware in, I might do that in the future. Taking a look at power consumption from the wall, it's about 25 watts idle and peaks about 32 watts under load. So these AM1 systems don't use very much power and won't add too much to a power bill. Total price of the system, depending on exactly how you got it, probably around $100. We'll say $25 for the board. You can get those drives for probably about $15 to $20 a pop. The cases and power supplies, you can get them for about $40, if not free, if you can find them locally. So this is pretty hard to beat for $100. Thanks for watching this video on this little cheap low-end NAS, and subscribe for more videos like this.